Can pursuing your own self-interest actually be the most moral thing you can do for society? That's the tantalizing promise behind Adam Smith's famous invisible hand. But is that really what he meant? Or have we been quoting him out of context for over 200 years? In this video, we're untangling the real story of the invisible hand. But the truth is, he was a moral philosopher first, and his masterpiece, The Wealth of Nations, was a sequel to his book on ethics, The Theory of Moral Sentiments. By looking at the one and only time he used the phrase invisible hand, we see it wasn't a divine law of markets but a specific observation about individual behavior that is far more fascinating and limited than its modern usage suggests. The popular image is of a man who gave us permission to be selfish, but this is a caricature. Smith was, for his entire life, a professor of moral philosophy. His first great work, published 17 years before The Wealth of Nations, was titled The Theory of Moral Sentiments. Its central question wasn't how do we get rich, but how do we become good, moral people. Smith argued that our morality comes from a natural capacity for empathy, or what he called sympathy. We observe others, and through our imagination, we can feel a shadow of their joy and their pain. This creates a natural desire for mutual approval. He wrote, to be amiable and to be meritorious. That is, to deserve love and to deserve reward, are the great characters of virtue. His entire system was built on social bonds, not isolated self-interest. So, how did this man become the patron saint of unfettered greed? The key is to see The Wealth of Nations not as a rejection of his moral philosophy, but as an application of it to the economic sphere. Smith was observing the birth of modern commerce and asking, in this new world of trade and industry, how can human beings, with all their flaws and self-interest, be guided to create a prosperous and stable society? He wasn't discarding morality, he was exploring its economic dimension. Now, let's get to the phrase itself. In the over 1,000 pages of The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith uses the term invisible hand exactly once. It's not a chapter title, not a foundational law, not even a major theoretical pillar. It's a passing metaphor in a specific argument about capital investment. To set the scene, Smith is arguing against mercantilism, the then dominant idea that a nation's wealth was measured in gold and silver, and that governments should heavily control trade through tariffs and subsidies to maintain a positive balance of trade. He makes the case that when a merchant thinks about where to invest his capital, he naturally prefers domestic industry over foreign trade. Why? Not out of patriotism, but out of self-interest. Investing at home is safer. It's easier to keep an eye on your capital, you understand the laws and customs, and the returns, while perhaps not astronomical, are more secure. Here is the famous passage. Smith writes that the merchant, by preferring domestic industry, intends only his own security, and by directing that industry in such a manner as its produce may be of the greatest value, he intends only his own gain, and he is in this, as in many other cases, led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. Let's break this down. The end which was no part of his intention is the public good, strengthening the domestic economy, creating jobs at home, and increasing the nation's annual revenue. The merchant's motive is personal security and profit. The unintended consequence is a benefit to society. Crucially, the invisible hand here is not a mystical force that magically turns greed into good. It is a metaphor for the spontaneous order that emerges from a set of specific rules, in this case, the rules of the market. The merchant isn't being led by a divine puppet master. He is simply responding rationally to his circumstances, and in doing so, his actions, when aggregated with others, produce a systemic benefit that he never consciously aimed for. So, how did this limited, specific observation become the timeless, universal law of capitalism we know today? The transformation began in the 20th century. As the Cold War heated up, economists and intellectuals seeking a moral and scientific defense of free market capitalism against Soviet-style central planning needed a founding father. It was stripped of its context and scaled up into a grand, natural law that the pursuit of individual self-interest always and inevitably leads to the best possible outcomes for society. This is a massive overextension of Smith's original point. Because if we actually read Smith, he was deeply skeptical of businessmen and their motivations. He famously warned that people of the same trade seldom meet together, even for merriment and diversion, But the conversation ends in a conspiracy against the public or in some contrivance to raise prices. He didn't trust them to be benevolent. His whole system was about structuring society so that their self-interest was channeled into productive, rather than predatory, ends. The modern myth of the invisible hand also completely ignores Smith's clear and extensive list of what the market cannot or should not do. He believed the state had crucial duties: to defend the nation, to administer justice, and most importantly for our discussion, to erect and maintain certain public works and institutions which could never be profitable for an individual to run what we would call public goods. This includes roads, bridges, public education, and other infrastructure vital for a functioning society. The invisible hand doesn't build lighthouses. So, where does this leave us? Reclaiming the real meaning of the invisible hand isn't just a pedantic historical exercise. It changes the entire conversation about the role of markets and morality. He was a nuanced thinker who understood that a good society requires both our innate moral sympathy and smart systems that channel our inevitable self-interest into positive outcomes. The invisible hand wasn't a magic wand that solves all problems. It was a simple, powerful observation about one way that uncoordinated actions can, under the right conditions, create beneficial order. The takeaway is not that self-interest is inherently moral, but that a well-designed society can harness it. It's a call for humility and nuance. It reminds us that the market is a powerful tool, but a terrible master. It is a human institution, not a force of nature, and it requires a strong ethical foundation and vigilant oversight to serve the very public good that Adam Smith, the moral philosopher, always held as the ultimate goal. The true invisible hand might not be in the market at all, but in the complex, empathetic connections between us that Smith wrote about. First, the bonds that ultimately make any society, and any economy, worth living in.